Hello, I'm Craig from Rise Bikes, and I'm here today to show you how to uninstall and reinstall your mid-drive motor on the RX and RX Pro. The first step in removing the RX motor is to remove the crank arm and crank ring. The first thing you'll need is an 8mm Allen wrench. Second part you're going to need is the crank arm extractor. Now, this works differently on a mid-drive than it does on a hub drive's standard crank system. And that is because when you put this in, there's nothing for it to push against. So what we simply do is we open up the other side and we have a long bar that we use to kind of loosen it up. With the crank bolt removed from the other side, you simply put a long bar pole in through, and the age-old wisdom of hit it with a hammer is what applies. Once you're done with the one side, repeat with the other. Once you have the crank arms removed, the next thing to do is remove the lock ring that holds the chain ring in place. To do this, you need to go clockwise, which is against normal things for loosening it. The reason why is because when you're pedaling in a direction that would normally loosen, so it's reverse threaded, so it tightens as you pedal. Sometimes this can be a very difficult ring to unlock, to undo, as it is held at roughly 35 newtons, which is the recommended tightness for it. And there's different ways you can go about trying to loosen it. As you're turning, you will notice when you turn, the wheel will turn with the ring. So you can either hold it with your hands, or you can get a small bar if you need. So you can put it in as a brace to stop the chain ring from going. Once, of course, you have now loosened it, you can remove the bar from the chain ring. Simply unscrew the ring, put it off to the side, and now the chain ring will just slide right off. There is a little bit of tension, of course, with the chain ring as the derailleur is pulling on it. So just be aware that it is going to pull back when you remove it. Now that you're done with the chain ring, you want to go to the other side of the bike so you can remove the cover plates that is covering the bolts that hold the motor into the bike. To remove the cover plate, all you need is a Phillips head screwdriver, and you'll undo the 3 screws in those holes. Now with the screws undone, simply pull out the cover. As you can see, once you remove the cover, inside are all the wires, and you've got the 3 bolts here. First wire I suggest you undo is the power wire. Now, make sure you remove the battery before doing this. You always want to have electrical safety. Now with a 13mm socket wrench, you want to undo the 3 bolts. The next thing you want to do is to remove the 3 bolts that hold the motor to the frame. These 3 bolts will be difficult to remove as they're held in quite tightly due to the motor being tightly set into the frame. Chances are you will need a hammer to at least get them out. With the bolts removed, it's now time to lift out the motor. I suggest you lift it out towards the back tire. This is because all the wires are on this side of the motor and at the back of the frame. Once you've pulled the motor out, you can swing it around to the other side so it can sit in the frame while you remove the plugs. If when trying to remove the plugs, you feel you're having a little difficulty due to the little clamp portions, you can use a small screwdriver to help remove it. With all the plugs now undone, you can now set your old motor aside. First thing you should now do once the motor has been removed, just take a look at your plugs to make sure there's no damage or breaks in the wires. While you're here, you might as well take a look. Now to install the new motor, you pretty much just do everything we just did, but in reverse. So first, put the motor on the frame so it's stable and you can work with the plugs. All the plugs are arranged in such a way that there is only one match for each plug set, so you don't need to worry about putting the wrong plug in the wrong part. You may notice you have this small black plug left over. Don't need to worry about that one. That one is the plug used to program the motor when it's still in the factory. You can just leave that off to the side. The next challenge you get to face is putting the motor back. Putting the motor in is easy, but making sure all the wires are lined up underneath it, that's where it takes a little bit of finesse. It is doable, it just might take a few minutes. To make sure it's seated right, simply look through the holes and make sure they're lined up. Now they won't be perfect, but that is okay. They just need to be very close. The next challenge is to put all the wires in and tuck them under so when we replace the cover cap, they're securely under it and they're not sticking out too far. Once you believe you have the wires in the right spots, simply take out the cover cap and test. Once you're confident with your wire placement, the next step is to put the bolts back in. To do this, you want to be on the other side, and you're simply going to hammer them back into the spot. Once you have put the bolts through, simply bolt them in. With the motor now bolted on, now we'll take a quick look at the wires to make sure they're still sitting in nicely. And now we simply replace the cover. Now once you have the cover in place, you'll notice that the side with the wires wants to push out a little bit. That's simply because the wires are pushing it out. So you can push it in as you screw and it'll secure. Once you've screwed in the cover, now it's time to put on the left crank arm onto the left side of the bike. When determining which crank arm is which, you will see on the inside arm where the pedals screw in, you've got one that has an L and one that has an R. When tightening the crank bolt, I find it easier to pull on the pedal and push on the Allen key wrench. When they meet, you know you're going the right way, and it will get tighter. Left side is done. Now we're going to work on the right side. Now that we're back on the right side, my suggestion would be to put the chainring on first, fold the derailleur forward, and loop the chain back on the chainring. With the chainring in place, the next step, replace the chainring lock. Now remember, this is reverse threaded. Thankfully, there's usually an arrow to show you which way you need to tighten it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you generally want this around 35 Newton meters in torque. If you don't have a torque wrench, that's fine. Just make it as hard as you can. Now that you have the chainring's lock ring on, it's time to put on your last crank. Now when putting your crank arm on, make sure you position it in the opposite direction of the other side. And now that that's done, you have completed the installation of your mid-drive motor for your RX or RX Pro. Thank you for watching.